A former TWA captain, well into his 70s, stood on the ramp at Kansas City in the 1990s, waiting his turn to fly an aircraft he had first flown as a young man decades earlier, and said something that the people who worked alongside him in the Constellation preservation community heard, in one form or another, from almost every veteran who came back. I retired from the airline. I never retired from her. He was talking about the Lockheed Constellation. Federal regulation had forced him out of the cockpit of a scheduled passenger jet at age 60. The mandatory retirement age that airline captains had operated under for decades. That regulation had no jurisdiction over a restored, volunteer-crewed piston airliner sitting in a hangar in Missouri, maintained by men who had spent their careers flying it and who, when the opportunity arose to bring one back to life, showed up without being asked twice. This is the story of an aircraft that pilots would not let go of, even after the law told them they had to stop flying for a living. The Lockheed Constellation retired from commercial service in the early 1960s. The people who flew it did not retire from loving it, and many of them proved that by returning, unpaid, decades later, specifically for this aircraft and no other. To understand why, you need to understand what made the Constellation different from almost everything else in the sky. The aircraft was designed by Kelly Johnson, the same engineer who would later lead the design of the SR-71 Blackbird, the fastest aircraft ever to fly in operational service. In the early 1940s, working for Lockheed under a specification driven substantially by Howard Hughes, who controlled TWA and wanted an aircraft that would give his airline a decisive advantage on the most prestigious transcontinental and transatlantic routes in American aviation, Johnson produced something that looked unlike any airliner that had come before it. Most aircraft fuselages of the era were straight cylinders. The Constellation's fuselage curved, a distinctive, gently tapering, almost organic shape along its entire length, giving the aircraft a silhouette that aviation historians still describe, without much argument from anyone, as one of the most beautiful ever produced. The dolphin-like curve served genuine aerodynamic and structural purposes, but the effect was an aircraft that looked less like an assembled machine and more like something that had grown into its shape. The triple tail, 3 vertical fins instead of 1, existed for a specific practical reason. It kept the aircraft's overall height low enough to fit inside the hangars that airports had already built, while still providing the directional stability a single, taller fin would have needed to supply alone. But visually, combined with the curved fuselage, it gave the Constellation a profile that was instantly recognizable from any angle, on any tarmac, at any distance. 4 Wright R-3350 engines, the same engine family that powered the B-29 Superfortress, gave the aircraft its power. These were complex, 18-cylinder radial engines that demanded constant, skilled attention from pilots and flight engineers. Mixture settings adjusted continuously, propeller pitch managed through every phase of flight, cylinder head temperatures watched like a patient's vital signs. On a long flight, a flight engineer might make hundreds of small adjustments across 4 engines, reading gauges, listening for changes in engine note, correcting before a problem could become a genuine one. Later variants added turbo-compound power recovery turbines, mechanically intricate devices that captured energy from the exhaust gases and fed it back into the crankshaft for additional horsepower. When they worked, the effect was remarkable. Extra power extracted from fuel that would otherwise have simply been burned and lost out the exhaust stacks. When they didn't work, which happened often enough to become a running joke among crews, flight engineers nicknamed them parts recovery turbines, because that was frequently what a maintenance crew ended up doing with them. None of this was simple. None of it was automated in the way that jets, arriving just over a decade later, would make routine. Flying the Constellation meant an ongoing, hands-on relationship between crew and machine. A conversation, almost conducted through gauges and levers and the specific sound of 4 large radial engines working in concert, that the aircraft's later jet successors would strip away almost entirely. If you've watched the video up to this point, you're about to understand exactly why pilots loved an aircraft that gave them more work, not less. Subscribe for more stories like this one. This is the detail that matters most to understanding why pilots felt what they felt about the Constellation, and it requires setting aside the assumption that easier is always better. The jets that replaced the Constellation from 1958 onward, the Boeing 707, the Douglas DC-8, were faster, more reliable, cheaper to operate per seat, and dramatically less demanding to fly. Turbine engines didn't require the constant mixture and cowl flap management that piston radials did. There was less for a pilot to actively do, moment to moment, once the aircraft was established in cruise. This was, by every commercial and safety measure that airlines cared about, an improvement, and airlines retired their Constellation fleets accordingly, rapidly, through the late 1950s and into the 1960s. But pilots who had learned to fly, and to fly well, on an aircraft that demanded continuous engagement, that rewarded skill and attentiveness with genuinely responsive, well-harmonized handling, that gave a crew visibility and control, feel that many of them described for the rest of their careers as simply more alive than what came after. Experienced the transition to jets as a kind of loss, even as they recognized its necessity. The jets were better aircraft by almost every measurable standard. They were not, to the pilots who had flown both, the same kind of flying. Career airline pilots who transitioned from the Constellation to jets in the late 1950s and early 1960s spent the following decades of their careers, and then their retirements, still talking about the Connie, the nickname the aircraft had earned from crews and passengers alike, with a specific fondness that the faster, safer, more profitable jets that replaced it never quite displaced. They would fly 707S and DC-8S for the rest of their working lives, professionally, competently, without complaint. And still, at reunions and retirement dinners and the informal gatherings that former airline crews tend to keep having long after the paychecks stop, the conversation would drift back to the Constellation. Not out of nostalgia for a simpler time, exactly. Out of something closer to unfinished business. And then, in 1986, a group of them did something about it. Former TWA employees, retired pilots, retired flight engineers, retired mechanics, men who had built entire careers around this specific aircraft type at an airline whose history was deeply entangled with the Constellation's own, founded an organization in Kansas City that became known, informally and then officially, as Save a Connie. Their goal was straightforward and, on paper, faintly absurd for a group of men well past conventional working age: restore a Lockheed Constellation to full flying condition and keep it flying. They did it. If you've watched the video up to this point, you understand exactly why this story matters. Subscribe, and you'll get more of aviation's genuine, human history every week. What makes the Save a Connie story specifically relevant to the question of why pilots refused to retire from this aircraft is who actually did the work. The mandatory retirement age for airline captains in the United States had, for decades, been 60 years old. A federal regulation that removed pilots from scheduled commercial cockpits regardless of their health, their skill, or their own wishes once they reached that age. Many of the men who founded and staffed Save a Connie had already been retired under that rule for years, in some cases more than a decade, by the time the restoration project began. The regulation that had ended their commercial careers had no authority over a volunteer-crewed, non-commercial, historically preserved aircraft maintained by a non-profit organization. And so men who had been legally prohibited from occupying an airline cockpit for pay returned, without pay, specifically to fly and maintain this one aircraft. They restored the airframe, panel by panel, matching original specifications wherever the historical record allowed it. They rebuilt the engines, the same complex, demanding Wright R-3350s that had required their full attention decades earlier, now requiring it again from hands that had not lost the knowledge, even after years away. Retired mechanics who hadn't touched an 18-cylinder radial in a working capacity for 20 years found that the knowledge was still there, waiting, the specific muscle memory of a trade learned in an era when engines this complex were the norm rather than a museum curiosity. They took the restored Constellation to airshows across the country through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, flown and crewed substantially by men who were, by any conventional standard, well past the age at which anyone would have expected them to still be doing this kind of work. Ground crews at the airshows where the aircraft appeared sometimes remarked on the specific quality of the volunteers running the operation. Not hobbyists learning a new aircraft from manuals, but men who had genuinely flown this exact type professionally for years and who moved around it with the unhurried confidence of people who had never really stopped knowing it. Some of them were flying the aircraft into their 70s, not as a novelty, not as a publicity stunt for the museum, but because they had the skill, the type-specific experience, and, more than either of those things, the specific, durable attachment to this particular aircraft that had never actually gone away, regardless of what the regulations governing commercial aviation said about when a man's flying career was supposed to end. The former captain who told his colleagues, "I retired from the airline. I never retired from her," was not being sentimental in an unusual way. He was articulating something that the entire Save a Connie community and the broader network of Constellation preservation efforts that followed similar patterns at other museums and historical societies understood implicitly. Retirement from an airline is a regulatory event. It has a specific date, a specific age, a specific legal mechanism. Retirement from loving a specific aircraft. For the pilots who had spent their formative flying years learning its particular demands and rewards was not something any regulation could actually enforce. The Constellation is, today, widely regarded among aviation historians and enthusiasts as one of the most beautiful aircraft ever built. The curved fuselage and triple tail, creating a silhouette that remains instantly recognizable decades after the type's mainline retirement at any air show or museum display where a surviving example appears. Several Constellations survive today in museums around the world, mounted on static display, admired for their lines by visitors who mostly have no idea what it took to keep 4 Wright R-3350s running smoothly across a transcontinental flight. A small number have been kept in or restored toward flying condition, sustained specifically by the volunteer labor and institutional memory of people whose connection to the aircraft outlasted their formal careers by decades. Each restoration effort has depended, to a degree that newer preservation projects for later aircraft types rarely require, on the specific and irreplaceable knowledge that only lived directly in the hands and memories of people who had worked on this exact machine when it was still in daily commercial service. As those veterans have aged and, over the years, passed away, the preservation community has faced an increasingly urgent question about what happens once nobody remains who learned to fly and fix the Constellation the way its original crews did. What the Constellation did, that so few other aircraft in aviation history have managed, was create a bond between machine and pilot that regulation, retirement, and the arrival of objectively superior technology never fully severed. The jets were faster. The jets were safer. The jets were, by every rational commercial measure, the correct successor to a piston-engined aircraft that airlines needed to retire. But the men who had learned to fly on the Constellation, who had managed her complicated engines and felt her responsive controls, and watched her curved silhouette catch the light on 100 different runways across 100 different decades of their working lives, never fully accepted that the story was over just because the airline said it was. They came back. Well into old age, well past any regulation's permission, they came back for this one aircraft and no other. If this story was worth your time, hit like and subscribe and drop what you think in the comments.